Hey kids, this is Pulse Ray Vision coming to you live from Cuatro Cinco Studios in my mom's basement. And tonight we are reading chapter 6 of Rings of Dust for you guys. So you don't have to listen to an AI voice read it just yet, and you don't have to read it yourself. So we'll jump into that right away here. You can read the entire book at t.me/antigravity saga, which is our Telegram. There's a link there that's pinned, I'm sure, that you guys can check out. So, yeah, enjoy that. And while we wait for that, you can listen to my smooth, velvety voice read this to you. Tonight is Chapter 6, Rings of Dust, Ray's Discovery. There might be some moments here where I pause and write down a couple notes for editing. I do apologize for those pauses. You guys are probably like, does his mic cut out? No, but I'm just writing down some things as I go through that I'm catching for like the 10th time through this. So thank you for your patience, and hope you guys enjoy. Chapter 6, Ray's Discovery. Ray worked at Alpha's Materials Research Division for 3 years before he understood what they were actually working on. The official designation was dark matter stabilization. The actual designation, which nobody used in writing, was they had something they could not explain and were trying to make it useful before someone else did. The something was Dark X. It arrived at the facility in sealed magnetic containers, 2 kilograms at a time, from a processing site that wasn't on any map Ray had been shown. It was black-gray, granular, slightly iridescent in direct light. It behaved like no material he'd worked with. It responded to magnetic field variations the way iron shavings respond to a magnet, except the responses were unpredictable, and the field gradients required were precise to a degree that made the testing equipment protest. Alpha wanted it stable. Dark X in its raw form held together for 11 days. After that, it degraded. So actually, the crystals hold together for 11 days. After that, it degraded. Not catastrophically, just gradually losing its structure, reverting to something that tested as a complex carbon compound with anomalous isotopic ratios. 11 days was the window. Alpha had been trying for 4 years to extend it. Ray's job was the stabilization matrix. He ran the salts, the additives, the magnetic curing protocols. He ran them carefully, methodically, the way he'd been trained. He documented everything. He ate lunch at his desk. He was, as the supervisors noted in his last review, thorough. He was also, by the time the Polaris disaster cleared the news cycle, bored. The crisis had begun not with a failure of technology, but with a coordinated financial assault. The global banking system had moved against cryptocurrency, specifically against the miners and nodes that had been building a decentralized energy grid outside institutional control. Regulatory pressure, liquidity freezes, infrastructure seizures, power plant shutdowns, power grid defunding that official channels called decommissioning. The grid had collapsed along fault lines that had been prepared in advance. What the Federation called an emergency shortage, the people who had built the alternative grid called an execution. The Polaris had not made it better. 369 people and 1 research vessel, the only large-scale non-corporated Dark X extraction attempt in Federation history. What remained was a narrative that DarkX was volatile and that its handling required institutional oversight, and that Alpha Corp's measured approach was the only responsible path forward. The narrative had served the people who needed it to. His colleagues called him Ray. It had started as a joke. His full name was Max Vision, and somewhere along the way someone had said Max Ray Vision because it sounded like X-ray vision. And the middle part stuck. He had never corrected it. He liked it the way it sounded more than he liked the way Max sounded. He took a sample home on Tuesday. This was not authorized. It was also not, in his assessment, particularly dangerous. The container was sealed. The quantity was small, 30 grams, and he had a specific idea he wanted to test that required more time than the lab schedule allowed. He put the container in his bag between his lunchbox and his headphones, walked through security, and went home. His apartment ran on a residential fuel cell array. Most did. The cells were stacked in a utility closet off the kitchen, 4 of them, standard civilian grade, the kind that got replaced every 3 years whether they needed it or not. He set the container on the kitchen table. He made coffee. He opened his laptop. The container was labeled with a red stripe and a lot of numbers. He labeled it himself that morning. He left it on the table overnight. In the morning, he felt it before he could name it. Not sound, not heat, exactly. Something closer to the sensation of a radio scanning through static, searching for a frequency just out of range. A low resonance below the threshold of hearing. A feeling of a node reaching toward a network that wasn't quite in phase yet. He'd been asleep. It woke him. He lay still for a moment, identifying it the way you identify something you've never felt before, but somehow recognize. Then got up. The container on the table was warm. He picked it up. Warmer than the room, warmer than it should have been, but the warmth wasn't the signal. He opened the utility closet. The fuel cell array status panel, which he had never looked at in 3 years of living there because it never changed, was reading a charge level he'd never seen on a residential unit. Not a malfunction, not an error, a charge level, the kind that residential fuel cells did not achieve. He stood in the kitchen and listened to the resonance, which was still there, the DarkX in the container and the fuel cells in the closet doing something together at a frequency he could feel in his sternum and could hear with his ears. "11 days later, the feeling stopped. The panel read steady, the cells were quiet, something had completed. He understood this later, the 11-day sync period, the time a newly assembled fuel cell required to align its internal architecture to the DarkX frequency before it could output power. He had felt the process happen in a kitchen in the middle of the night, without instruments, without authorization, without any preparation except having been bored enough to take something home. He got a notepad and started writing down what he was going to need. He worked for 33 days. He didn't call it that at the time, 33 days, but that's what it was. He ordered equipment through his personal accounts in small enough quantities that none of the invoices looked like a materials research project. He locked the fuel cells together. He documented the results, ran it again, he verified the charge levels. He charted the crystal growth on the inside of the cell casings. Thin at first, then accelerating, unmistakably, the same isotopic signature as the DarkX he started with, and growing at a rate 10 times faster than any unlocked cell produced. fuel cell was producing new dark matter, not outside, inside. Crystals were growing in the locked space between the cells, accumulating in the dark interior of the casing at a rate that had no precedent in any stabilization mode he'd ever run. Not a lot, not quickly, but 10 times faster than it should have been, at the rate that, if he held, would not compound. If it held, would compound. On the 11th day of the lock, he found something he hadn't been looking for. One cell, just one, out of the small array he'd assembled, had grown crystals on the outside of the casing, not inside, where the accumulation was happening. Outside, at the base, a thin, unmistakable deposit where there should have been nothing. He stared at it for a long time. He checked the other cells. Nothing. Just the one. Jackpot, he said to the empty apartment, and then felt the dread move in behind the word and fill all the space the triumph had just vacated. He sat with the chart until the numbers stopped moving. He went into the lab the next morning and told his supervisor he needed time on the main test bed. The conference room was windowless and overlit, the flat fluorescent kind that made everyone look like they hadn't slept. The table was long, the coffee untouched, the air recycled to the point where it tasted like nothing at all. He walked them through it in the order he discovered it: 11-day sync, the 33-day lock, the point where the internal crystal growth jumped to 10 times the unlocked rate and held there. The charge output, the darker matter accumulated inside the locked casings. He had photographs. He had numbers. He showed them the numbers in the clear, careful way he'd always showed them things. The same way he'd presented 3 years of stabilization data and watched their faces. The supervisor's face did something that was not surprise. The man next to his supervisor, introduced as a representative from Alpha's executive division, whose name Ray did not catch, had no expression at all, which was its own kind of expression. "Where did you run the initial test?" his supervisor asked. Ray told him. The room went quiet in a specific way. He was fired that afternoon, not for taking the sample was not mentioned. He was fired for, as the paperwork stated, a failure to adhere to research protocols and the unauthorized dissemination of proprietary findings. He was told, in language that was careful without being explicit, that the research he had conducted was the property of Alpha Corporation and that any further discussion of his findings internally and externally in any medium would be treated as a breach of his existing non-disclosure agreement and prosecuted accordingly. He was escorted to his desk and given a box. He walked home. He was still carrying the box when Red and Squirrel knocked on his door. Ray's apartment had gotten smaller since the firing. The oak table, scarred from years of restless nights, held the fuel cell under a blanket and not much else. The place smelled like cold coffee and the ramen packets he'd been living on since the firing. The foil wrappers stacked in a neat pile next to the sink because he was the kind of man who let his laundry climb up the bedroom chair for a week, but couldn't stand trash on the counter. A single light hung overhead. The faint hum of the lamp was the only sound. In front of him, the stolen fuel cell gleamed dully under the light. He stared at it, half expecting it to give him answers. The thought of selling it tugged at him. The black market would pay a good price, but the longer he looked at it, the more something twisted in his gut. The same thing that had twisted when he'd first seen the charge readout. The thing that had been trying for 3 weeks he'd been trying for 3 weeks to kill and couldn't. He hadn't realized how small his apartment had become until the two people stepped inside. Squirrel crossed the threshold first. Squirrel crossed the threshold first, his heavy boots thudding against the worn hardwood floor. Red followed, her gaze sweeping across the space with a quiet intensity that made Ray's skin prickle. They were not the kind of people who fidgeted. They moved through the room and stopped and waited. And the quality of their waiting was very different from the waiting of civilians. They didn't sit. They didn't move toward the couch, half covered in old blankets. Instead, they positioned themselves near the table, not threatening exactly, but settled in the way of people who intend to conclude this conversation before leaving. Squirrel didn't waste words. We have a window of about 72 hours before Alpha sends someone who isn't going to knock. You're already on the list, Ray. You've been on it since that night you told your department head. Ray looked at them. You people have been watching me? We've been keeping you alive, Red said. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. I understand that. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, unhurried like she was prepared to be there a while. What you found in that locker, didn't stop being important because they took it from you. Alpha knows the discovery exists. They know you made it, and they have built a significant amount of current business model. They have built a significant amount of their current business model on the fact that the rest of the world does not know what you know. Ray's hand moved toward the blanket on the table, then stopped. He looked at Squirrel. What do you actually want from me? We want you alive and working, Squirrel said. We have a place for you to hide, and a new identity to protect you. And in exchange, you keep doing what you're doing. Research doesn't stop. It just stops belonging to the people who bury it. Ray was quiet. Outside the window, a car passed and did not slow down, and its headlights swept the ceiling of his apartment. He had been watching the headlights for 3 weeks, logging which ones slowed down. You understand what the cell actually did, Red said. It was not a question. Alpha thinks they understand it. They're harvesting the output, the crystals, the yield, the energy the conversion cycle produces. They built their whole operation around the output. She leaned forward. They never figured out what they're actually dealing with. They only ever saw it as a container. They saw what they expected to see, Ray said, in spite of himself. Yes. He looked at the cell under the blanket. I packed the crystals in there because it was convenient. The negative pressure, the nitrogen atmosphere, I thought it was just a stable environment. I wasn't trying to trigger a reaction, I was just trying to avoid paperwork. And that's exactly why they can't reproduce it, Squirrel said. Alpha standard containment runs nitrogen. Open cycle. Nitrogen atmosphere, no seal modification. Every lab in the program, every researcher, whoever handled darker matter crystals ran the same protocol. He looked at Red, then back at Ray. Nobody sealed a cell under negative pressure. It wasn't in any protocol. I added it as a shortcut, Ray said. You added it because you were trying to avoid a walk across campus. That single variable, the seal, is why they've been failing for 2 years, trying to reproduce what you found in a locker on a Tuesday. Ray pulled the blanket away from the fuel cell. He hadn't meant to do it. His hands made the decision before his head caught up. The cell sat on the table, dull and inert in the lamplight. I know how the cells work at 11 days, he said. That's the window Alpha operates on now, or operates on. They found the yield threshold, and they've been farming it ever since. Harvest, reset, repeat. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a battered notebook. That's the window Alpha operates on. They found the yield threshold. They've been farming it ever since. Harvest, reset, repeat. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a battered notebook. Several pages were covered in diagrams, heat maps, rough models of accumulated behavior. What I don't know is what happens if you don't reset. Red looked at the notebook. I need proper instruments, Ray said. His voice had changed. He was not frightened anymore. He was precise, and precision was, for him, a kind of territory, a controlled environment. I need to test what happens if you don't reset. I cannot do that here. Squirrel looked at Red. Something passed between them. Not surprise, recognition. The kind of look two people exchange when the person across the table has just described exactly the gap they've been trying to fill. That's why we're sending you inside, Squirrel said. Red pulled a card from her pocket and set it on the table. Plain, no logo, a handwritten address. Tonight. Flight out. New name. New country. Tonight? The window closes tomorrow morning. Ray picked up the card. He set it back down. He picked it up again and held it. He looked at the fuel cell for the last time in his apartment. He put his notebook on top of it, carefully, like he was tucking something in. 72 hours, he said. Less now. He stood up, went to his closet, pulled out a bag from the top shelf, and stood holding it for a moment. He started packing. He was not fast about it, and he was not slow. He was precise. He took the notebook, he took the fuel cell, wrapped in the blanket. He left the loan statements on the counter. At the door, he turned back and looked at the apartment once. The lamp still burning, the oak table still scarred, the lamp's flicker still going. Then he followed them out into the dark. The flight was 3 hours and 40 minutes. Ray slept through one of them, not by choice, but because his body had been making decisions without him since the apartment. He woke up to descent. The seatbelt light, the PA announcement, something in Spanish, then English, then Spanish again, as if the English had been a courtesy they'd already moved on from. He did not have luggage. He had a backpack. Red had handed him in the car, already packed, his name not on it. Inside, things he did not remember owning. A change of clothes, a toothbrush, still in its packaging, a paperback in the language he couldn't read. He hadn't opened it. He came through the arrivals into the main hall of Tucumán International Airport and stood still long enough that people behind him had to move around him, which they did without comment, having seen that before. The heat hit him outside, not gradual, immediate, physical, the air swapping itself for something thicker. It was 9 in the morning and already hotter than he'd lived in. He was wearing a jacket. He took the jacket off. He stood with the jacket over his arm and looked at the street in front of the terminal. Taxis, vans, a man with a handcart full of something green, someone's grandmother in a lawn chair conducting business of some kind. At the end of the pickup zone, a line of pedicabs, three-wheeled, fringed awnings, drivers who had the patient stillness of people who know how to wait and have been doing it. He had an address on a piece of paper. Red had written it in block letters. Cali 50, Circa de la Cresta, Below it, ask for Lucia. Below that, don't take a cab. A pedicab driver made eye contact. Ray held the eye contact too long, which was apparently sufficient. You go? The driver said. Ray showed him the paper. The driver glanced at it, nodded once, gestured at the seat with the efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times and found no reason to expand it. Ray sat, the driver mounted the front, and started pedaling. They entered traffic. Traffic in Panama City operated on principles Ray did not have access to. There were lanes, but the lanes were advisory. Signals existed, but were in negotiation with everyone else. There was a sound system, horn, counter horn, acknowledgement horn, horn of general principle, that carried specific meaning to everyone who spoke it. He did not speak it. The driver did not seem concerned. He cut between a bus and a delivery truck at a gap Ray would not have called a gap, banked hard left on a street that appeared to be going right, threaded a roundabout by logic Ray couldn't identify, and came out on a boulevard lined with glass towers that threw the morning back at everything beneath them. The city was big. This was the thing he hadn't expected, that it would be this operational, this indifferent to his arrival. He had not thought about Panama as a place. It had been a word on a piece of paper for 2 days. Now it was a city going about its morning in heat and he hadn't lived in, and languages he didn't speak, at a place the pedicab was matching without effort. A bus pulled alongside, blew its horn for reasons that weren't apparent. He grabbed the side rail. The driver looked back. It's okay, he said. Bus always does. They turned off the boulevard onto streets that were narrow and lower, the buildings closer together, the sounds differently textured, generators, music through open windows, a saw running somewhere up a side street. A woman leaned in from a second floor window and called something down to someone Ray couldn't see. A dog crossed the road with the authority of someone who'd done it many times and trusted cars to have figured it out by now. The pedicab slowed on a block of storefronts, a pharmacy, tienda, something selling fabric, something selling something he couldn't identify, and stopped in front of a door painted green. Not recently green, the green of someone that had been green, something that had been green long enough to mean it. Calle 50, the driver said. Near La Cresta. This one. Ray got out. He gave the driver money Ray had it put in his jacket pocket. He didn't know how much. He just gave him all of it. The driver looked at it, gave some back, and pedaled away. Ray stood in front of the green door. He was going to knock on it and ask for Lucia. He was going to do that in a moment. He was standing here because this was the first time since the apartment that he had been somewhere without someone telling him where to be, and he needed to use it. He thought about the fuel cell on his table, about the number, about the look on their faces when he'd shown Alpha what he'd found, the moment they understood what it meant for them, and the speed with which they'd decided to bury him with it. He thought about Red and Squirrel in his apartment doorway at 6 a.m, with the car already running. He was in Panama. He was alive. He was standing in front of a green door in a city he'd never been to, holding nothing that belonged to him, about to knock and ask for a woman named Lucia. He knocked. Lucia? We're going to go with Lucia. Aboard the Meridian. 3 days after the farm road, Emily's signal moving east had a particular quality in the trace, a slight Doppler adjacent skew Kate had learned to feel for the way you feel for a key in your pocket. Emily was driving fast. No, Emily actually was not driving fast. Let me put this down here. I'm just scanning this because I think this is going to end up later in the book. This shouldn't be right here. Maybe this is the right one. Okay, this part I think is supposed to actually be here. Aboard the Meridian. What Kate had not put in her 7-sentence relay was what happened after she hit send. She sat for 11 minutes. The ship day lighting ran at the same level regardless of hour. The Meridian didn't track a planetary cycle. The station at 0300 looked identical to the station at 1400. Kate had stopped noticing this. She started noticing it again after San Francisco. Deo found her there when he came on shift. He read the confirmation on the screen and stood for a moment, not rushing, not looking away, locating the feeling precisely, putting it somewhere it could be carried. Her droplets on the wall, Kate said. I know. I put it there after we lost her. I didn't ask anyone. He didn't need to ask, he said. He sat in the secondary comms chair. Peter asleep? Yes. Good, he paused. A droplet's not a rank. The crew's saying we saw you. Sure never wanted in. Ran her own game. For her own reasons. And turned us down every time we asked. But she knew the work. And she knew what it was for. He looked at the wall. You put it up because someone should mark that we knew her. Kate said nothing. We're going to get the data out, she said. Not a comfort, a statement of intent. Yes, Deo said, we are. Outside the viewport, Saturn's rings caught refracted sunlight and held it, a thin, bright edge in the dark. The ship, at this hour, made no sound you could name. Only the held absence of it. The held breath quiet that had been held so long it had become a normal structure of the air. Kate had stopped noticing it. She noticed it now. The network needs people who choose it, Kate said. Sharon opened the door, Deo said. Whether the sister walks the rest of the way through it is up to the sister. That part was never ours to assign. All right. Boom. That is Rings of Dust. Chapter 6 under TTS Ready if you guys are going to use the link right there. If you guys want to learn more about the cryptocurrency project that's associated with this story, that this is explaining actually the mechanics of and the game theory of, go to agproject.io, connect your wallet, get some Darker, mint some fuel cells, and have fun farming and getting paid. Again, our Telegram is t.me/antigravity saga, and that's where you can come ask questions, click on the links, click on the pinned messages, and catch up to the Space Cult. Thanks. We'll see you on
Tops up, the neon starts to glow. Lowercase connection, entering the show. Top right corner where the wallet interacts. Digital contract, tracking down the facts. The ticker symbols blinking on the sidebar screen. The dark is the atmosphere setting the scene. Round one is coming, the season's on the clock. Secure the network, time to lock it in the black. Welcome to the darker matter. Standard rules apply. Load the fuel cells up before the timer passes by. Into the void we will go, where the smart ones play. Minting out the future, trade into the shadows. Watch the ticker climb. Build the data stream. Living on the edge of the cyber grid machine.
Sacrifices, waiting at the gate, calculating yields while we wait upon the day. Claim the EDOT payouts, tally up the wins. This is where the high stakes strategy begins. They say it's for the smart ones, written on the wall. A gamified ecosystem, standing tall. Read the how to play if you wanna know the way. Before you launch the app or end in disarray. Ticks on the countdown, now it's turned to days. The price of darker matter, moving through the haze. Is it an illusion? Is it by design? Watch the smart contract as it aligns. 3, 2, 1. Let the protocol run. Welcome to the darker matter. Standard rules apply. Load the fuel cells up before the timer passes by. Into the void, here we go, where the smart ones play. Minting out the future, trade into the shadows. Watch the ticker climb. Feel the data stream. Living on the edge of the cyber grid machine.